We are living in an era that has made the performance of work more visible than the work itself. You can post about what you are building before you have built it. You can document the process before the process has produced anything. You can talk about the vision, the grind, the hustle, the early mornings and the late nights, and get validation for all of it before a single thing has actually been made. And the validation feels like progress. It registers in the same place. It produces the same momentary satisfaction as actually finishing something, which means a man can spend months in the performance of building and mistake it for the building itself. Because the response from the outside world did not distinguish between the two, the work does. The work knows the difference between the man who is building and the man who is performing building. And over time, over the long, slow, accumulating span of a man's life, only one of those men has anything to show for it. The performance of work produces an audience, the work itself produces a life, and those are not the same thing. Matthew 6. Jesus is not talking about productivity when he says, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. He's talking about giving. But the principle underneath it reaches into everything a man does with his hands. Because the reason he gives for secrecy is not humility as a virtue in itself. It is this: your father. We are living in an era that has made the performance of work more visible than the work itself. You can post about what you are building before you have built it. You can document the process before the process has produced anything. You can talk about the vision, the grind, the hustle, the early mornings and the late nights, and get validation for all of it before a single thing has actually been made. And the validation feels like progress. It registers in the same place. It produces the same momentary satisfaction as actually finishing something, which means a man can spend months in the performance of building and mistake it for the building itself. Because the response from the outside world did not distinguish between the two. Let me be specific about what the unseen work is. It is the hour of reading before anyone else is awake, the prayer that happens before the phone is picked up, the decision made in private that nobody will ever know about, but that the man making it will carry in how he moves for the rest of the day. The draft that gets written and deleted and rewritten, not because anyone is watching the process, but because the standard matters regardless of whether anyone sees it being met. It is the conversation a man has with God in silence, the discipline he keeps when no one is checking, integrity he maintains in the small transaction that will never be audited, the work he puts into the thing that will not produce visible results for months or years, that uh, the thing that requires him to trust the process without the encouragement of the outcome. That work is not glamorous. It does not document well. It does not produce content. It produces a man. And the man it produces is the only asset that actually compounds. Everything else, the results, the recognition, the visible evidence of success flows from the man. And the man is built entirely in private. First Samuel 16 verse 7. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Samuel was looking at Jesse's sons, trying to identify the next king. And he was looking at the obvious things: the stature, the presence, the visible qualifications. and God redirected him each time. God was not selecting based on what was visible. He was selecting based on what was happening at the center. David was in the field. Nobody was watching him. He was keeping sheep, which is about as unglamorous a preparation for kingship you can find. And in that field, unseen, he was becoming the man that would kill Goliath. Not because killing Goliath was his training goal, but because faithfulness with what was in his hands in private produced a man who could be trusted with something larger in public. Luke 16, verse 10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. That much always comes after the little. And the little is always there, always where no one is watching. The faithfulness in the small, private, unobserved moments is the qualification for everything that comes after. We do not get the large assignment without the small one. And the small one is never as visible as the large one. The private work is not preparation for the real work, it is the real work. What happens in public is the evidence of it. But the building happens before anyone shows up to watch. Here is the question that reorients everything. Who are you working for? Not in the career sense, not who signs the check or who the client is or who benefits from the output. Who are you actually working for? At the level of motivation, at the level of what drives the standard you hold yourself to, at the level of what you do when no one is checking. Because if the answer is the audience, if the standard rises when people are watching and relaxes when they are not, then you are not working for something stable. You are working for something that fluctuates. And a man whose standard is set by the audience will build only as well as his audience can see. Colossians 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. That phrase, not for human masters, is the key. Human masters are present sometimes and absent sometimes. They check sometimes and don't check sometimes. They notice sometimes and miss things sometimes. Man who is working for human masters will unconsciously calibrate his effort to their attention. The Lord sees everything, all of it, the work in the open and the work in the closed room, the decision made publicly, the decision made privately, the standard held when someone is watching, and the standard held when no one is. There is no difference in the observation, which means there is no permission to let the standard drop just because the audience has left the room. The man who works as if God is watching, because God is watching, does not have a public standard and a private standard. He has one standard, and that standard is the most durable thing a man can build his life on. This is what Matthew 6 is teaching underneath the surface. When you give in secret, when you pray in secret, when you do the work in secret, and your Father who sees in secret rewards you, the reward is not just the outcome, the reward is also the man being formed by the practice. The man who gives without being seen giving is becoming a different man than the man who gives publicly. The man who prays in the closed room is becoming a different man than the man who prays to be heard. The private practice is forming the private man, and the private man is who you actually are. Proverbs 4, verse 23. Guard your heart, for everything flows from it. What you do when no one is watching is the truest picture of what is happening in the heart, not what you do on the platform, not what you produce for the audience. What happens in the room with the closed door. That is the heart. And everything, every result, every relationship, every visible output of your life flows from it. So let me give you something practical. If you want to know the state of your private work, the work no one sees, ask yourself this: what would my output look like if no one was watching and no one would ever know? Not what it should look like, what it would actually look like. If the documentation disappeared, if no one was going to see the process, if the only thing that remained at the end of the quality was the quality that you built, would you build it the same way? For some men, the answer is yes. Their private standard matches the public one. The work they do when no one is watching is indistinguishable from the work they do when everyone is. Those men have built something real. The foundation matches the building. For other men, the honest answer is no. The private standard is lower, unseen work gets less. The hour that was supposed to go to the thing that matters gets spent on the thing that is easier. And the public output is built on the private deficit that is not visible yet, but it is accumulating. That deficit compounds too, and not in the direction you want. The correction is not complicated, it's just comfortable. It is a decision to hold to the same standard in private that you hold to in public. To do the unseen work with the same quality and the same commitment at the same work, to work as if God is the only audience, because He is the only audience that is always present. David kept sheep faithfully before he killed giants publicly. Jesus prayed in the wilderness before he preached to thousands. Nehemiah survived the walls at night alone before he rallied the people, built them. Private work came first. It always comes first. And the quality of the public result is always a reflection of how seriously the private work was taken. Stop performing the work, do the work in private without an audience, with all your heart, as working for the Lord. That is where everything real gets built. Here is what I'm asking you to do when this episode ends. Look at the private work, not the visible output. Anyone can look at that. Look at what is happening in the unseen hours, the early morning before the phone comes on, the decision made when no one is checking, the standard you hold in private when the audience has gone home. Ask yourself honestly, is the private work matching the public picture? Because the public picture is built on the private work, always, without exception. And the man who is investing heavily in the visible output while the unseen foundation is thin is built something that will not hold the weight of what he is putting on top of it. The only work that matters is the work no one sees, not because the visible work is unimportant, but because the visible work is the downstream of the invisible work. Fix the invisible work, and the visible work will take care of itself. Neglect the invisible work, and no amount of visible effort will compensate for what is missing underneath. The Father sees what is done in secret. He is watching the private work. He is watching the closed room. He is watching the decision made when no one else is looking. And that is where the reward is built. Not in the performance, but in the faithfulness of the unseen. Do the work no one sees. Do it with everything you have. That is the only work that matters. I know what I just asked you to go back and examine. For some of you, the private work is solid, and this episode is confirmation. For others, there is a gap, you know exactly where it is. Either way, today is the day the standard gets set. In private, with the door closed, where it actually counts. This is Built Not Felt by the Rice Code. I'll see you all in the next episode.